outlined from the start, this is not going to be a presentation about propagate augmented reality and you should go and use it. It's not about that at all. It will be about using augmented reality as a framework to establish the new practices and design to set up user experiences. So it will be more about digital thinking, its challenges, and its opportunities. So the current project and current research I'll be presenting has been done in the Horizon Digital Economy Research Institute over just the course of just under half a year. So it's not a long project, and there's also a partner involved, which is the National Civil War Museum in Newark. So we've been working with them closely to investigate their augmented reality offering. However, I'm not going to be focusing on that too much today. I'm going to be talking broadly about user experience and user engagement. So, in the society we currently live in, we can see like how the phones have become pervasive around us. Everywhere you look, you see on the bus and you see everybody being on the phone. Using social media, using devices to capture information, to share news, became a default in our society. But what is interesting, there are three waves of computing. And we are now currently in the third wave of computing, which is known as ubiquitous computing. The first wave of computing was defined by the mainframe computing, which was about having one computer and many people. The second era, the second wave, was about the PC. So you have one device and one user. In the current paradigm, we have many users and even more devices, and even more computers. So the paradigm of ubiquitous computing is about computing made to appear anytime and anywhere. Such computing can occur using any device, in any location, anytime, and in any format. So with that thought in mind, let's go back to our devices that we have at hand. We often forget how capable those devices actually are. And here you can see some of the applications the device is actually capable of. So we're talking geopositioning, we're talking the ability to determine the position in space, the location, as well as the ability to emit and receive different wireless signals. So what is augmented reality? Augmented reality is an approach to the interaction between humans and the environment and its associated technology. Three factors need to be present. It's the digital information, which is displayed in the physical environment in a contextualized manner, and it's in real time. The concept of augmented reality stems from such disciplines as aviation and engineering. However, if you haven't tried or seen augmented reality before, what you need to do is pick up the latest IKEA catalog and pick up your phone. And you can actually fill the room with the latest furniture IKEA offers. That's the basic way you can actually feel closer to augmented reality pretty much tomorrow. So, going back to the serious point, in the last couple of years, there is a sense of expansion towards this fascination with virtual and augmented realities. So the market itself, the immersive market, is expanding, and we see panoramic content being presented by such institutions as the National Geographic, the BBC, and Discovery Channel. Such head-mounted sets as Oculus Rift, Sony PlayStation, Samsung Gear, increasing their presence on the markets and will continue to do so. It's becoming commonplace for people to expect an immersive experience, whatever that means, whether it's being panoramic, whether it's being augmented, or being virtual. However, what I like about some of those offerings, obviously some of them require quite complex head-mounted sets, like the one at the bottom. The one on the top is quite simple. You have a phone and you have a piece of cardboard which you put around your face, and it costs about £5 to do that, obviously excluding the cost of the phone. But so there are opportunities, and they are really taking off. However, in 2007, Wagner concluded that no augmented reality project has been successful to appear to mass market. And he was right right about it in a sense, because at that time most augmented reality applications were found required heavy setups, required static computers, required desktop computers. And only now, in the last couple of years, we're seeing the involvement of augmented reality moving towards much more approachable and much more mobile experience. So as you can see on the screen, one of the pioneers in the UK was Wimbledon, who created this beta version of the Wimbledon app. In 2009, they released the beta version, and then in 2010, they created a full-on release. What you could do with that app, you could walk around Wimbledon courts, and it would show you where the course will be and where certain activities will be happening, where the refreshments will be. So essentially, it's a compass that helps you to navigate around the course if you have no clue where to go. Amongst other early adopters was the Louvre and the Museum of London. The V&A did an interesting installation with mirrors where you would walk past and the mirrors would respond by changing lights and changing contours depending on your proximity. So those are the early adopters in 2009, 2011. But still then, it was pretty much in the research phases. Obviously, the university had been working on projects for years beforehand, but it hasn't hit the mass market yet. What's interesting here, I've listed mainly the public sector projects in the UK since 2011. So we're seeing how the British Museum, the Science Museum, as well as the Natural History Museum, kind of taking a lot of interest in the technology and really pushing their projects. As you can see, some of them haven't sustained the legacy, partially because there's a sense of trial and error and trying to experiment with different technologies the augmented reality offered. But some of them actually sustain themselves over time, like we see James May science stories, or we can see Isle of Wight project, which was essentially about they brought the project out when the film about dinosaurs came out, so they panned out a huge commercial campaign. And then the local council kept the project just to keep attracting people to Isle of Wight. So you can go around Isle of Wight with your iPad and your iPhone and explore different sites which they thought were still interesting and relevant even after the film release. Locally, by the way, as well, there are a few examples there, such as the Nottingham Castle and the latest one, the National Civil War Museum, just at the bottom there. So I don't know, you can't quite see that, but I'm kind of talking 13 is there, there's 14 there, 15 there. What's interesting here, I mentioned the Wimbledon's, and it was in 2010, and already by the London Olympics, we had 5 augmented reality apps in place. So the transition is actually quite insane in comparison, knowing that 72 years passed. Anyway, going back to the idea of user engagement and user experience, I'd like to draw your attention to those following statements. That functionality of a system is defined by the set of actions or services that it provides to its user. And usability of a system with a certain functionality is the range and degree by which the system can be used efficiently and adequately to accomplish certain goals for certain users. And I think, as much there is skepticism about augmented reality, and a lot of people seem to think it's a fashion thing and it will go away, I think a lot of the reasons why certain technologies haven't taken off as much as they could have is because they've been poorly designed and haven't considered the implications the technology would have on users and how users would genuinely respond to them. So I would like to draw your attention to the sense of purpose. And by looking at the different applications of augmented reality in the UK and abroad, I came up with this list of different possibilities that augmented reality actually addresses and solves. I took some of those out, such as, for example, the usage of augmented reality in medicine, where they use devices to actually, for people who have scared of spiders, they project the spiders on their hands, and that supposedly actually helps them kind of deal with the anxiety they have. So I excluded some of them and kept the ones that seemed more relevant for the current context. So we see the visual representation, or we can kind of this notion of seeing more by having augmented reality in place. Historical reconstructions such as the tours you can do around Italy and Berlin Wall. Navigation in space, such where you can see overlaying spyglass, which is, so you hold the device and it shows you the bearings of the compass, shows you where the stars are, shows you gyroscopes and all sorts of readings that you would like to stick to. There's gaming, there's creative part, where actually by having augmented reality you find you can generate your own content. You have product testing, like with the IKEA furniture. You have kinetic learning, you have public data-based education, and takeaway value, meaning something you go to a location, experience it, and then actually you can take someone with you. Also social sharing, like the EDF platform they did at the London Olympics, where you could actually stand next to a famous athlete. Obviously it wasn't a real athlete, it was a projection of a real athlete, but the idea was that you can become part of the experience and share it out to other people. And also virtual exhibitions. So V&A Expired was an interesting project on hidden gardens, where you couldn't see the exhibition there, but once you had an iPad or phone, you could see the exhibition. That was the point. So it's this idea of moving somewhere else by having this other reality. There are a few examples, kind of, we can talk later about more if you like, but these are the interesting points. And one thing is also pivotal here is that there is a potential to create new experiences, not just within each of those categories, but actually by merging them together. And also by looking at individual kind of chapters and saying, well, what are the opportunities and what are the problems in each of them, and how by extracting certain elements from each of them we can merge them into something else. So something got derived, which is a flow chart of how any AI experience is being experienced. Sorry for tautology, but the idea is the following. So how does one arrive at AR? Where is it found? What triggers AR? What happens during AR? What exactly does it offer? What you can do with it, and what follows afterwards? And you'll be surprised, but a lot of examples that currently are on the market actually can't even answer some of those questions, and the answer you can give are really basic. And I think that's the good thing, because that shows there is a much more capacity to evolve the technology and evolve that approach to experience. For those who are not too familiar with augmented reality, I will say there is a sense of trigger at all times. So in order for content to be released, whether it's being video, sound, three-dimensional model, there needs something that sparks that connection, which will be established with your device. And again, device can be anything. Device can be a computer, it can be this sort of device, or it can be Google Glass. Obviously, in this current presentation, we're mostly focusing on the mobile devices. Let's talk about some examples. Union Station, Kansas, a train station in Kansas City, let's put it that way. They panned out a big project because they had a 100-year celebration of this beautiful building they have. And what essentially happens, you can turn up with your device and they would offer you audio, they will offer you video, and they will offer you pictures, depending where you're based in this marvelous building. They will have the Bluetooth technology involved, so it will trigger relevant content and relevant parts. You could also access the content remotely, like I can do it here, but I wouldn't be able to see all of it. I'll be able to hear the audio, but I wouldn't be able to see the immersive video they're offering, because the idea is that you can hold the device like this and at the right location, and it shows you exactly how it merges together between the past and the present. And apparently some very famous moments happened there, and Hemingway was there, and some American presidents had some fighting there, so it was quite a significant place. Another example, UK-based, David Attenborough, and this was the National History Museum when David Attenborough released his new documentary. What that experience offered was you sort of had to be on location because most of the content was actually prohibited for you to access. But you could still access some stuff at home. It was sparse, but nevertheless, the amount of content they offered was actually quite astonishing, because in most of the applications you either get one or the other. You get maybe some audio, maybe a video. In that case, they got got skeletons and they turn, then you've got the panorama, and then you've got animals that came to life, and then you can also sort of put those animals inside the museum whilst you're there as well, almost like you're interacting with the real things instead of the fake ones. But again, when we look at what follows after the AR, there is this notion that nothing actually follows. You experience it and then you kind of just move on. And again, what can you do with it? Nothing. You just sit there, you look, and there's the audio-visual engagement happening. But beyond that, there is still a lot of scope that needs to be explored to push these ideas further. So, again, looking at all these AR offerings, some categories came about. And so it's the nature of content, the notion of trigger, notion of time, notion of location positioning, and sharing and co-experience. This will get sort of dense. But if we look at the nature of content, this is not just about how we look at AR, this is generally how we can look at digital offerings and say, well, what does it do exactly, why does it not do that, and what are the combinations of those, and what exactly do they achieve. So in terms of the content, again, it's audio, video, it's animation, it's anything. Source, that's an interesting one. So you can either have a publicly outsourced content, or you can have authority-defined content. Is it restricted? Is it accessible to anybody? What are the implications? Environmental integration. So in some cases, I can put a piece of paper on the table and make it, I don't know, like a planted here that will be three-dimensional. Is this organic integration? Not really, because it comes out of place. So there's a notion of whether AR fits naturally or not, and whether we're experiencing something which just looks odd and out of place. The notion of trigger, as I mentioned before, you always have to have a trigger. Is a trigger dynamic? In most cases, it's static. It's a sticker somewhere on the table, somewhere next to an exhibit that you have to physically come to. Well, what if the trigger was moving? What if it was changing locations? Again, how does it enable the experience? Is it flat? Is it trigger flat? Is it not? Is it a real object? Do I just scan the room and then something plays, or does it have to be a predetermined model by a developer? Can the locations spark the experience? What about GPS, sound, and the most advanced of will human movement and biometric information? And as you can imagine, in most cases, the majority of them stick to quite basic implications. GPS being heavily used, three-dimensional, two-dimensional triggers are being used, primarily predefined by developers in advance. Not many examples are there of sound or human movement to be found. Time, how do we experience the augmented reality? Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it defined or is it not defined by time? And again, you can read further now, for an short time. But yeah, so is the experience integrated in any way, and how it is, and does it enable navigation? And again, another quite important thing, a lot of the time there is a problem with experiencing AR as a very private experience. And what are the opportunities if we were to experience as a public experience? And because, if I were to wear Google Glass or have a phone, it's a completely different setup. So those things need to be considered. Further opportunities, just to clarify again, I've just noticed there's gaps in current applications, and those are identified here. There's an interesting example at the Science Museum where they have this floating beacons in kind of above you, and you can record the sounds as a user, turn out to be down, pre-record the sound, and that will be stored in this kind of online space. Challenges. There are a lot of challenges associated with this. Why would people care? What's the achievement afterwards? Can I share it? Can it be captured? Again, talking about personal public interactions, what's the nature of those? And then purely technically, how the trigger is maintained, and I can't hold the device for too long. So just to kind of sum up, what exactly are the further, even bigger implications of this, and how that can evolve? What would happen if we were to modify the experience, create our own experience, or at least favour it, at least select the relevant content? Distribute AR content. How do we share it? How do we incorporate that in the overall experience with other people. Ability to leave digital footprint. Ability for content to transform. Say we see one thing when it's summer and see another when it's winter. Ability for the content to become adaptable to new environments. If I were to take that dinosaur from the Natural History Museum in the street, would it get cold because it's cold outside? How do we predetermine these things, and what's the potential for even considering those options? And the last one is about creating the experience which is based on multimodality of inputs, which is essentially if we combine sound and combine touch and combine, I don't know, anything else you like. But the idea is, why don't we create multiple inputs for that information to come on to us? Yeah. Thank you.